Commandeered by government agents, Franky's beloved ships did the one thing he never would have wanted. In pointing their guns at those he most cared about, Franky indirectly endangered his own family. Racked by shame at his failure, Franky would cast away his own ships, denying his involvement and disowning the vessels he made with his own hands. But that was the one thing Tom couldn't accept. Franky had once been abandoned by his own parents before being taken in by Tom, yet once he was inconvenienced by what he'd created, like his own father, he'd cast that troublesome thing away. As much by his own father, if not more, Franky was shaped by Tom, the one who took him in like family. And though Tom was prepared to take responsibility for what he had done, he would not leave the world without instilling his values in Franky. Tom would not stand for Franky making the same mistakes his own father did, for betraying his own creative spirit by standing against Tom's ideals. But Franky didn't care about any of that. As his father figure was being taken away from him, he fought back, standing against the puffing Tom in a vain attempt to resist the beliefs Tom lived and died by, as though that might undo everything. Though Franky had tried to reject reality, losing much of his body for his failure, ultimately he was the one who created the fleet of ships that led to the end of Tom's life, even if he did not pull the trigger. Franky had made ships without intent to cause harm, yet despite hurting no one himself, irreversible damage was done. Vehemently opposing Franky's negligence, Iceburg is a man who holds much value and responsibility. Though he initially appeared irresponsible, casually cancelling several meetings while giving off a negligent air, at the same time, by cancelling those appointments he was able to heed Kokoro's request to help the Straw Hats, and shortly after he adopted a pet mouse on a whim, Tyrannosaurus remaining at his side for virtually every appearance of Iceburg's in the series. Iceburg takes great accountability for his actions, becoming the well-respected mayor of Water 7 in Tom's absence to lift up the city that Tom had given his last years of life to save, valuing the life that Tom had protected by putting it to its best use. Iceburg could be said to have built Water 7 in its present day, and by taking a position as its leader, he took responsibility for that shipbuilding island's place in the world. Iceburg built a community, an economy, and a productive market, but one thing he never made was weapons. Growing up with Franky, a boy as negligent as Iceburg was responsible, Iceburg believed that a gun made would be a gun fired. Regardless of what the creator hoped, there would be people out there who would snatch away that gun and fire it. The Battle Franky incident was Iceburg's words made into truth, and his ideals do hold logical basis. If the weapon was made and fired, then the creator had to share fault, because had the weapon not been made, it would have never been fired at all. For Iceburg, the mere existence of a weapon is a threat to peace, something that puts him at odds with Nico Robin, even though they agreed ideologically. Iceburg, knowing the location of the Pluton blueprints, held in his hands the counterweapon to whatever the government possessed that they needed Robin to reactivate, and Robin herself was the key to that weapon, her very existence a gun that was waiting to go off and destroy the whole world. For Robin to exist in the world freely was no different to Iceburg than Franky's ships, left out in the open for anyone to commandeer. And the one who had given the order to take control of those weapons was the same, in both instances. Spandam, desiring the Pluton blueprints, had given the order to use the Battle Frankies to destroy the judicial ship, and years later would use the threat of the Buster Call to force Robin to come to Ennia's lobby. Spandam is all of Iceburg's fears personified, using the great power of the world government to obtain any gun he can and fire it at a whim, while also opposing Tom's ideals, never taking responsibility for his own actions and always blaming others. Though the Elder Stars above him only casually accepted his plan, never admitting any desire to use any ancient weapons, for peace they would still hold on to that power, glad to maintain their control over the world. Their casual allowance of Spandam's desires was indicative of their whole. Ancient weapons, the Battle Frankies, the pacifist units, artificial giants, science untested. As long as the government had people challenging their authority, they will use whatever guns they have at their disposal. Iceburg and Robin agree in ideology because it is the ideology of the world they live in, one in which those in power will take whatever guns they can find to dispose of their enemies. That in itself is another form of control and power, Spandam remarking on the idea of authority as its own weapon. Power may not corrupt, but it does reveal. Those who will exert power on others gladly doing so once they have it, even if they might have little power in themselves. And in that world where power was wielded without responsibility, those in power not needing to be accountable for their actions, Iceburg could never forgive Franky. Talents like theirs were rare, and for it to be wielded without responsibility could lead to untold amounts of harm. However, while Iceburg's ideals hold an uncomfortable amount of truth, within them is a contradiction. Iceburg tells Robin that he doesn't believe weapons can bring peace to the world, giving it his all to ensure the government doesn't get access to the ancient weapons. Yet the Pluton is in itself a weapon, one that Iceburg wishes to see destroyed, but must exist if the government has potential to use another. Weapons don't bring peace, yet weapons must also exist in counter of others to prevent rule by power. And if it was negligence that allowed weapons to be used by those not fit to use them, then it had to be responsibility that served as a counterforce. Tom said that if a ship sails a pirate flag, it was a pirate ship, and if it flew a marine flag, it was a marine vessel. In much the same way, a gun wielded as a weapon might be used for dominance, or if wielded defensively, it was for protection. That is not to say the creator is without accountability in the creation. Tom made the Oro Jackson, the ship that sailed to the end of the world, allowing the Roger pirates to discover secrets of the world that its government wanted to remain buried. Tom was indicted for that crime under the same ideals as Iceburg, and he was proud to have made that ship regardless of its actualized purpose. Regardless of intent, one had to take responsibility for their actions, so if the world decided that Tom's creation was a crime or a blessing, then he would accept that creation either way. Even if his creation had led to his death, Franky wasn't the one to kill Tom. But Tom wasn't blind to Iceburg's ideals either. In taking the Pluton blueprints and continuing to pass them on, he carried on the responsibility of the civilization who made the ancient weapons. They knew the threat of their weapons and prepared something to end the threat if it became one, incorporating a failsafe that the Battle Franky fleet had lacked in its negligence. Existing isn't a crime. Franky told Robin these words as one who understood her better than any. While Robin agonized over her position, one that could endanger the whole world, including those she loved, Franky had already lived a microcosm of her fears. In response to the corrupted usage of the Battle Franky fleet, the 36th Battle Franky was a weapon that could not be appropriated. Like Iceburg took control of Water 7, Franky took power over the Battle Franky by making himself the latest version. To survive after his failure, he had to take Tom's words to heart, while also internalizing Iceburg's ideals, though not totally agreeing with them. Franky had become a weapon that could not easily be used by others, rather than one that could be left with others to take and use as they pleased like the Pluton. And here he spoke with Robin, someone allowing herself to be used by others as though she were that wayward blueprint. Tom urged Franky to have pride in his creation, and he touted his own cyborg abilities with as much of a don as Tom would have wanted. And yet, Robin had no pride in who she was. As a gun, an object, it was not her who had accountability for what she did, just those who used her. But even if Robin might have been used, that doesn't mean she would be used. Even if she had potential to be a weapon, she was also a human, one with the capability to choose how a weapon is used, if at all. By choosing to live, she finally took responsibility for herself, even if it meant standing against the world. And Franky, carrying the responsibility of his past, destroyed the blueprint. If Robin would resist the government, and the Straw Hats could protect her, then Franky would take on the responsibility of those past ages by removing the ancient weapons, destroying the blueprints and saving Robin so neither could be used, gambling on human action and responsibility rather than relying on the Pluton desired by the likes of Spandam and Crocodile so they could betray the use that it was passed down for. In rejecting the power the government desperately clung on to, he joined the Straw Hats in defying the world government, not controlled by fear of the unfired gun, but instead trusting in those who would stand against the negligence and drive for power that led to those ideals ringing true. Iceburg's ideology echoed in one of those very oppressors, who expressed his opinion that Robin should simply die to better maintain peace, willing to destroy such a weapon even as he was wielded as one himself. Tom took responsibility for everything he did, making the Oro Jackson, building the Sea Train, raising Franky and Iceburg. In his last act, he gave Franky a lesson he would never forget. When the young man returned to Water 7, rather than build ships, those that could hurt others, he instead became a dismantler, one of the many actions he took in repentance for Tom's death. He took all the scum of the island and made them into his followers, defended the island from pirates, protecting Water 7 from the shadows while Iceburg guided it from the light. Iceburg said he would not forgive Franky for his role in Tom's death, and Franky was right there with him in agreement. He could never bring Tom back, but he could avoid bringing more weapons into the world that he wasn't prepared to be responsible for, and he could help the city that Tom worked to save. but that would be at the expense of himself and his dream. Franky, trusting in the Straw Hats, built for them his final ship, the Thousand Sunny. But though it was his ambition to travel on the Ship of Dreams, Franky couldn't accept it. As the one who'd led to Tom's death, he couldn't just abandon Water 7. But as one who did so much for the city, he couldn't just abandon his dream out of his own guilt either. Franky created the Sunny much like he birthed his own dream, when he proudly proclaimed to Tom with a dawn. The family he had made didn't require him to be there forever, but the Sunny would suffer without a proper shipwright. And though he had every reason to trust them, should the worst happen and the ship fall into the wrong hands, then no longer would it remotely be the ship of his dreams. And so Franky threw his lot in with the Straw Hats, protecting Robin as a crewmate and maintaining the Sunny as its builder. And in that, I believe, Tom would have been nothing but proud. As always, I'd like to thank my patrons, Mohammed Hakim, Justice Man, Sam Bellmeyer, Bro Rike, Offline But Not, Bayanort, Flarbu, Gloogle, Tengoon, Thanks Naturad, Brian Nesseth, Doji32161, and Mr. Cynical. And thank you for watching.